Good morning and welcome to Moments with Melinda. I am your host, Melinda Moulton, and today I am so delighted to have Orly Yadin with us today. Orly, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So I'm sure many of my viewers here and most people in Vermont know who you are, but for those of you who don't, I'm going to tell you a little story about Orly. Orly Yadin was the executive director for Vermont International Film Festival for 13 years and is the founder and owner of Yadin Productions. As an award-winning filmmaker, Orly is also an educator, lecturer, convener, and community leader. It's a great pleasure to have you on my show, Orly.
Thank you. I've watched some of your shows before with other people. They're always interesting. Let's hope we can match them.
Oh, you're going to be fabulous. And yeah, I've been doing my show since 2000. So it's been 25 years. I've watched myself age. But Orly, let's start at the very beginning because you have a fascinating life. Talk to us a little bit about your early years growing up.
Well, I was born in Israel, but at the age of 3.5, my parents and I, of course, went to London for a couple of years and then back to Israel and then back to London. So my childhood growing up was sort of split between these two countries, as well as France and on almost all summer holidays.
Tell us a little bit about your family members, because I believe that you have some notable family members in your life.
Yeah, they're not alive anymore.
No, they're not, but share a little bit about your parents, and I think it was a grandparent. Talk to us a little bit about that history. Your family.
Um, what can I say? I was born in a very particular time, historical time in the Middle East. The Ben Gurion, who became the first prime minister of Israel, declared independence for Israel in 1948. And I was born after, once the state of Israel was declared. But my ancestors, almost all of them, arrived in Palestine at the end of the 19th century or very early 20th century, and were each one of them was very active and influential in their Zionist activities, whether it's in purchase of land, whether it's in the development of modern Hebrew as a common language, whether it was in biblical archaeology, which basically means digging, searching for evidence from 3,000 years ago, so-called biblical times, evidence that they were trying to find proof that material proof that Jews had lived there all those years ago. My father was a biblical archaeologist, but he was also during what the Israelis call the War of Independence, the Palestinian calls the Nakba, which means catastrophe. 47, 48, 49, he was also chief of staff of the Israeli army. His father was the first to discover the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so it goes on, which is quite a burden to carry as a child and as an adult in two different ways.
I hear you, Orly. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's so important. So you did arrive in Burlington from London in 2002. You were presenting your own films at the Vermont International Film Festival events. Talk to us about your early films and was it VTIFF that inspired you to come to Vermont?
Well, I started working in the film world or television world actually as a film researcher in London. Finding archival footage for documentary series. One of the biggest ones I worked on was called End of Empire, which is basically was the history of the British, at the end of the British, the last days of the British Empire. And it was a wonderful job. I did it for 2 years. Basically, I was sent around the world to all the film archives to find footage. And I considered myself incredibly lucky. And so I got involved in the kind of archival footage world and did some more research for other programs, then started directing my own based on always documentaries with archival footage and so on. At some point, I got a little bit bored by the format. It was a TV format, talking heads and a bit of archive, talking heads and a bit of archive. And even if the people had very interesting things to say, I found the format a bit repetitive. So it so happened that I had some friends in London who were animators, and they came to me and asked me to produce a series they were planning about the status of women under British law. And I said to them, well, I know nothing about animation. And they said, that's fine, we do, but we know nothing about documentaries because these were all based on real cases. So we want you to produce our series. And I did that, marching through, knowing nothing, but learning a lot in the process. And I discovered for me, a new way of telling true stories. So then the next few years, I set up my own production company and produced, directed, or wrote, or a mixture of the three animated documentaries, which today may seem more common, but at the time, we're talking the 1980s here, was very unusual. So that's what I did. And
That
in fact, my first contact with VTIF that you mentioned was in the year 2000. Kenny Peck was then the executive director of VTIF, and he invited me. I was here on a visit and met him, and he invited me to present a program at the festival in 2000 of British animated documentaries. So that's the first time I was actually connected to VTIF. Little did I know at the time either that I would move here or that my connection to the organization would become much deeper.
And we are grateful to Kenny Peck and to you for making that move. Um, so you became then the executive director of VTIF in 2012, and I understand it got its start in 1985 at Marlborough College and grew out of the anti-nuclear movement. George and Sonia Cullinan were two peace activists who founded this organization. Talk to us a little bit about the history of VTIF and how it started back in 1985, and now, so many years later, it's just this extraordinary organization. Talk to us a little bit about that history.
Well, it's really an amazing journey. I mean, I spent quite a bit of time researching the history and the origins of VTIF, or VIF as it was then known. The T was only added when the internet came in. Apparently, my predecessors had wanted, a URL, viff.org, but that was already taken by the Vancouver International Film Festival. So somebody had the idea to add the T for Vermont. So that's how it became VTIF. Well, the Cullinans, yes, they made this documentary about an anti-nuclear march from Washington to Moscow. But of course, that was from Washington, Vermont to Moscow, Vermont. And then they showed it in Marlborough College, as you mentioned, and it was a great success. So they had this idea of starting a film festival that would promote anti-nuclear concerns, and then later it developed into general social justice issues and the environment. And it had different names at the time. It wasn't called the Vermont International. It had various other names that were to do with social concerns. And the first festival in Burlington was 2 years later in 87. But actually, VTIF is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, 85 to 2025. So it's had a long life, and it's had ups and downs, and it's had it had a variety of directors, executive directors. The last one before I became the director was Mira Nyagalova, who is a filmmaker here and also teaches at Champlain College. But she stepped down in where are we now? 25 in 2007, I believe. That was her last year. Before that, in the 90s, I never had the pleasure and the honor of meeting her. But Lorraine B. Good
Mhm.
was, from everything I've heard and also saw in terms of looking at the programs, was an extraordinary executive director of VTIF. And sadly, she died too early. So Mira was the executive director till 1907, as I mentioned. And then for a few years, there was no director. There was just a board. Deb Ellis was the president of the board. And, so it was all volunteers and it was very difficult. And there was even a moment when we were close to shutting down. I was invited to join the board in 2010, although I'd never lost connection with VTIF since I started living here and I volunteered and presented some programs, was on a program committee, etc. And then I joined, and then I was asked, the board realized that it couldn't really survive without a full-time staff. So I became that director
And you
in.
became that director. So for my viewers, I'm talking to Orly Yadin, who was the executive director for Vermont International Film Festival and has been involved in promoting cinema as an art form here in Vermont for many years. I want you all to visit the website. It's just very simple, vtiff.org. vtiff.org. Go visit the website. It's a great website. So, Orly, you have been credited with taking VTIF to a new level during your 13 years as the executive director. For instance, you did help our community to embrace cinema as an art form. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, when I joined, even though it had, the breadth of the festival had grown since the days of the peace and justice days of the 90s and late 80s, but it was still mainly focused on social issues. And social issues, are very important, but they tend to be quite depressing usually. And in fact, I remember when I first started applying for grants, I was told by at least one grantor, "Oh, you are the doom and gloom festival." Now that's a label that's quite difficult to get rid of, and also I felt that we should be a cinema organization, not a social issue organization, which doesn't mean to say that one cannot show films that relate to various, social concerns, but that our focus is basically cinema as an art, because even though there were other movie theaters in the area, not many, but they mostly showed Hollywood pictures and there was hardly any room for our audience, our community, to see independent films from around the world. And that's when the board and I together, once we started, we redefined the mission of VTIF. And basically, it's bringing the world to Vermont through film. So it's bringing the world, it's hearing different voices, watching, looking at, and absorbing and learning about different cultures. And that doesn't have to be done through a documentary necessarily. Fiction films are also a very powerful way of seeing how people think, what their concerns are, their artistic sensibility. So that's how I hope I helped in developing that aspect of VTIF.
Yes, you did. So talk to us about some of the projects. I mean, you created the Global Roots Film Festival. Talk to us about that. I mean, that is bringing the global to Vermont.
Yeah, so until 2000 and 2013, I my first after my first year of being a director of the festival, um, basically the organization VTIF had one festival. It was a one festival a year organization, or usually in October. It was decided was the best, most suitable time. But the rest of the year we did nothing, and I felt that we could do more. Uh, so one of the first things we did was indeed establish the Global Roots Film Festival, in addition to the Vermont International. And we ran that for quite a few years. It was just stopped this year for reasons I'll explain in a minute. And then we also started with Main Street Landing Performing Arts Center and Mariah Riggs at its helm. We started a monthly film screening. So we had 12 films a year, one a month in the film house at Main Street Landing Performing Arts Center. We had Global Roots and we had the Vermont International. And then about 6 years ago, we added another festival called the Made Here Film Festival because, yes, the world is very important, but we also felt that people needed to become more familiar with what people in our region are doing. So Made Here encompasses Vermont filmmakers, but also all of New England, and we brought in Quebec as well, our neighbors to the north. So three festivals, and the reason Global Roots was stopped is because I believe this was not my decision. It was Steve McQueen who succeeded me as executive director. Because the latest thing that happened still under my, umbrella, that's probably not the right word, but anyway, we also created a micro cinema at Main Street Landing on Lake Street. And that enabled the organization to show films every week, not just once a month or during the festivals. So there were so many activities that Global Roots was dropped. It was felt, all these type of films could be shown weekly in the screening room, the micro cinema. And so it's all grown.
Has grown. So again, my viewers, go to vtif.org, please, and check out all the programs and the festivals that are coming up. So Orly, you and VTIF created the Vermont Archive Movie Project, known as VAMP. I love the name. Can you talk about that program? And are my viewers able to access that archive?
Yes, so in around 2015 or 16, we were talking about various people connected to film throughout the state of Vermont were saying, all these films have been made here in the past. But as you know, films, whether they were shot on film or video or, especially film and video, they deteriorate over the years. And we felt that we needed to create some kind of consortium to see if we could raise money to restore some of them at least. And in the course of that, we also said, well, we need a database. We need a database that would encompass, have in it records of all the films that were made here for just, for the ages, for people doing research, people wanting to find them, what was done here, what locations were appear in these films, because that's also a historical document. So this was as I said, statewide consortium, and the Vermont State Archive was involved in that, the Vermont Historical Society, special collections at UVM, various filmmakers like Nora Jacobson, and we raised money in order to have a bit of money to restore films as needed, but also to have an online database. And for many years, we constructed this database with the help of archivists and digital archivists, and it still exists. it needs updating. Everything's a question of staffing and money, as you probably know, but it still exists, and people can just go to vamp.vtif.org and search for films, search for locations, search for filmmakers, and
That's fantastic.
I very much hope that this will continue to be filled with new filmmakers, new information about old films, and so on.
It's really important. So in 2023, Orly, you received the Walter Surf Medal for Outstanding Achievement in the Arts. And this is an award presented to individuals who made a sustained contribution to the arts and had an impact on Vermont's cultural life. Talk to us about this well-deserved award.
Well, it was no one was more surprised than I was, I can tell you that. Um,
I don't think any of us were
it,
surprised, Orly. None of us.
it was a great honor,
Who was
and
Walter Surf? Who was Walter Surf?
well, you're asking me now, and of course, I've it slipped my mind,
That's okay.
but
But you got the award, and I think it's a great award. And the governor awards that. Am I correct? And
yes, it was the governor. It was in the governor's
Governor's
awards.
Award.
Yeah,
And then also you
absolutely.
just got an award a couple years ago from VTIF as well.
Did I? Maybe.
I think you did. I think you did. But anyway, so let's move on to current moment for you. You are presently creating a film which is partly experimental in style, documenting your childhood and your family's evolving role in developing Zionism. Can you talk to us about this project, Orly?
It's a project that's been in my mind for many years now. And while I was the ED of VTIF, I had no time to do anything else. That was a 24/7 more or less job. And but when I stepped down, I thought, okay, this is what I want to devote some of my time to now. And it's it is a first person feature length documentary, and it addresses it's through various people in my parents, grandparents, great grandparents, etc., using them to actually talk about bigger issues, which I find very interesting, which is, first of all, how is a person's identity formed in childhood? And how does that child come to terms with that identity in maturity? You know, when uh, what is a nation? We all belong to, we all have citizenships in various countries. But it's not just a legal thing. There is a concept of a nation. Like I always hear, and more recently, by the way, from all my American friends. I am a US citizen now, but obviously I'm not American, cut, But I hear them talking, we all talk about what's going on and so on. And I hear more and more this phrase, this is not America. So, what do people mean when they say this is not America? They have some concept of what America stands for. The same thing in other countries. Every country has its what binds us together. What are there? 340 million people in the US, I believe, or something like that. Now, Melinda, you an American, maybe 500 out of those 340 million, and yet you feel some kind of connection to all these millions who you have no idea who they are, what they do, etc. So, what creates that connection? So, I'm focusing in this film about Israel and Palestine. In the 19th century, and up to the 19th century, I should say, there were Jews all over the world, and they shared religious practices and they shared some cultural practices, if you like, or values, but they were not a nation. Suddenly, in the 19th century, influenced by the Enlightenment and other nation state movements in Europe, especially, the Jews suddenly thought, some of the Jews, especially initially the Russians and Germans, thought, well, it's time, maybe we should be thinking about creating a nation. So I look at that, what at these early Zionists and say, why, what did they do in order to become a nation? Before that, they were a people, a religion, an ethnic group, maybe. And of course, they were all different. The Jews in North Africa and in other Arab countries, culture, sorry about that. It'll go. Yeah.
Oh, I
Uh,
can't find Orly. It's fine.
anyway, so I was okay, what do you do? What does a people do if they decide to become a nation? So obviously, and I look at it, examine it through what the Zionists do, and of course, there's things like you need a common language, you need a piece of land, you need proof that you have a right to that land, and eventually, probably you also need an army to defend that land. Now, all of these things happened in the history of Zionism, but of course they happened at the expense of another people who were on that land. But when I was growing up, all this was taught to us, not the other people. We were not never taught about the Palestinians except as bad Arabs. And as children, as I think children anywhere in the world, you absorb what you're taught at school, the whole education, or the stories that go through families, and you believe in them, as I did. But also there comes a point where you start, as you mature, as you become an adult, you you start thinking for yourself and you start looking around you. So my film, in a very brief way, follows what formed my identity as a child and my generation, not just me, of course, but I tell it through my and how that changed as I became an adult and began to see what I didn't see as a child.
So when that's released, I definitely want to have you back on my show. Orly. So I also think that Vermont should be its own nation. So, well, just like Liechtenstein, I'm going to start working on that. So, Orly, as you know, the Roxy Theater in Burlington was closed, and it's such a shame that it is not being used for cinema. Have you thought about collaborating with individuals and organizations to purchase the facility and bring film back to Burlington's multi-screen downtown theater?
Vita started thinking about having its own cinema about 6 or 7 years ago because we felt, the Roxy was great for certain films, but not for the kind of films. And we worked on it quite hard, and we had a business plan and went to search for various venues. And then COVID happened, so that came to a stop. But also, the thing with the Roxy, or rather its owners, I should say, they had a history of not allowing anyone else to open a cinema. I mean, they owned several cinemas, and they one or two were destroyed rather than sell them to another group
Dear
who
Lord.
wished to
Oh,
continue it
that's
as
shameful.
a
I'm sorry
cinema.
to hear that.
Yeah, and
Because I do think we could raise money and buy that facility. I'm sorry to hear that. That's very disturbing.
we tried to work with them in partnership, and that uh, that was not to be because the owners did not
Do not
did
want to
not
see
want
cinema
that.
because it competed with their other.
So when the Roxy closed, on the one hand, I was very sad, because there are hardly any cinemas in the area. There's the Essex and the owners still own the Majestic, but that's about it. Palace 9 closed, Roxy closed, the only cinema in town. So in some ways, although that was very sad, in some ways that was beneficial to VTIF because VTIF is now became the only cinema in town. And it was lucky that we had the screening room in on Lake Street to and the micro cinema to at least show films regularly.
And that Main Street Landing has their film house and they're showing lots of great films and
Absolutely,
Operation
absolutely,
VTIF.
yeah.
You
And
did a
also, the owner of the Roxy said publicly in an interview with 7 Days that they were going to sell the building. They own it, but they would never sell it to somebody who wishes to have a cinema in it.
It's crazy, just crazy stuff. So I'm putting that out there. So Orly, let's move into some of your short films. You're recognized for your short films, and your films were highlighted at VTIFF in 2023. Films like Blind Justice, Someone Must Be Trusted, Some Protection, The Stain, Silence, and so many more. Your films focus on discrimination against women, rape, suicide, Holocaust survival, and many other social ills. How can film change the minds and provide enlightenment? And isn't that the premise of the mission of VTIF?
It's certainly the premise and the mission of VTIF. I'm a strong believer in film really influencing us, any kind of film, if it's well made, especially. Although, unfortunately, some bad films also influence us. But, they don't have to be documentaries, fiction film with its power to touch our emotions can really change our life. And mainly, I think, especially if you watch films from other cultures, it could be an adventure film, it could be a comedy, it could be a tragedy, it could be a romance, it doesn't matter, or a documentary about some. If you see people, real, just ordinary people, or on screen, doing stuff or having relationships or whatever, you hear other languages. I'm a great believer in the importance of knowing more than one language, more than one's mother tongue. It opens you sometimes even without realizing to other ways of thinking, to other ways of feeling, to other ways of connecting with people, to new issues you had no idea about. I think it's one of the most educational artistic media there is.
And with live streaming now, you can live stream shows all over the world from different countries. And with closed captions, you can listen to their language, which I prefer to do, and then read the closed captions. So thank you for that. Now let's move into this year's VTIFF Festival. It begins on October 17th and runs through October 26th. Most of the films are being shown at the Main Street Landing Film House and in your screening room and the black box. So, to my viewers, I'd like you to pick up your 7 days coming up because the entire program will be inserted in the paper. Talk to us about this year's festival, Orly. It's a little different, where I think you have more films, but they're being shown once. Talk to us a little bit about the festival?
Well, I can talk a little bit. I mean, it's really Steve McQueen you should be talking to about the festival. But actually, as we speak, I see it's 12 noon now, more or less. The festival program has just become live. So anybody can look at the program online. I think literally from 2 hours ago. And see, I know that there are more. I was on the programming committee. I think there are about 9 or 10 people on the programming committee. It's a volunteer job. And so I've seen some of the films, but not all of them. No one sees all of them. It's impossible. We start with hundreds. And then finally, the last step is, the executive director makes the final choice because there may be 200 wonderful films, but you don't have space or room for that many films. So you start looking at what is the balance of the program. Do we have films that represent different parts of the world? Are they different styles? You don't want 10 from France and none from Tibet, for example, and so on and so forth. So I suggest people just go online, look at the program, and I always used to suggest to people, who think, okay, I only have time for over these 10 days, 50 films, I can only see a maximum of 10, say. That's a lot, but it's not, And also when I taught, because I used to t give talks to students at UVM about the festival every year. And I told the students, whatever you do, choose some films that you think you're going to be interested in, but choose one film that you think you have no interest in whatsoever, because you might be surprised. This is how you open. If it's in the festival, there is a reason for it, and probably a very good reason. So open yourself to surprises.
And you go online to vtiff.org and you can buy your tickets. So I encourage everyone to go there. And just so you know, Orly, I am going to have Steve on my show. But since you were involved with so many years, I did want to ask you and get this out there now about the festival. So, Orly, we're coming sort of to the close. I could talk to you for a week, but with the current state of our world affairs, the Vermont International Film Festival and all of the films that focus on the state of our climate and humanity, this is a time greater than most in our history for an organization like VTIF to help educate, illuminate, inspire, and enlighten humans to the problems that are facing our planet and our species. Can you talk to us briefly about your hopes and fears for our planet and our people?
That's a big one. You should ask philosophers about that.
Oh, no, I think with the work you've done over the years with socially responsible film and the work that you've done, I think you have some words of wisdom for my viewers on what are your hopes for our humanity?
I think empathy is one of the most important qualities we should try and develop inside ourselves. Um, not coming with any preconceived notions about other people or who they are and so on, and try and empathize. And I think cinema can really, really do that. It That's all I can say. That's our only hope. If we are not empathetic, there's no hope for society, really.
Unfortunately, right now, there's not a lot of empathy that we're seeing in this country. So, just taking it one step further, what words of wisdom would you give my viewers and especially our children on staying hopeful and positive about the future of our country, the world, the planet, and our species? What do you, just share a little bit of wisdom for our children who are growing up in this world, because you and I are both in our 70s, I believe, and
Yeah.
we've lived a lot of life. So, can you share a little bit about that?
You're really putting me on the spot. I don't pretend to give advice to, despite my age, I don't pretend to give advice to other people, except be open and listen and try and put yourself in somebody else's shoes. That's the only hope. I mean, at the moment, it's very difficult to be hopeful. I have to
Difficult
say,
to put
I
ourselves
don't want to end this on
right.
a
Well,
pessimistic note, but really it's back to listening and doing the best you can to help people and
and
try
helping
and
mind.
understand where they're coming from. And yeah, I don't know.
I always end my interviews with that question because I think everyone, and I've gotten some incredible answers, and as was yours about empathy, opening your minds, learning as much as you can. I mean, I think that's very helpful for my viewers of how to get through these difficult times that we're living through. Well, to my viewers and to you, Orly, about sums it up. And I know you know that I'm a great admirer of yours, and we are all better humans because of the lessons we have learned from your creative work. So bravo for a life well lived and so much more that you have to do. Thank you, Orly, for being on my show.
Thank you, Melinda.
And to my viewers, have a beautiful day. This autumn is turning in to be really quite robust. I was kind of shocked how gorgeous it is out there. So everybody should get out and enjoy it. And I will see you when I see you again. Thank you so much for joining us.